Hi, all. This is Patrick Odin, professor, making a video appearance. I had some thoughts on the theme of the week that I don't know how much ended up in the lecture, and I know some of this did, but I thought I'd add some thoughts as we enter into week 3 of the quarter. The discussion is Sabbath, the day is Martin Luther King's Day, and there's just a lot going on, and I thought it'd just be nice to fill you in a little bit behind the scenes too. So I'm going to talk a little bit, not too long, hopefully, on some thoughts about Sabbath in the midst of a busy life and a lot of things going on. And this is one of those things where we see in the Bible and say, it's great for them, but how do we do this when our schedules are not our own? And society isn't in keeping with this goal, and it's not even church. We like to call Sunday Sabbath in a lot of popular church talk, but of course that goes against the nature of what the Sabbath was intended to be, which is a day of rest. And for most of us, Sunday is not a day of rest, and I'm the same way. So I get up usually early on Sunday mornings and lead a men's Bible study and then go off to church. Sometimes I play in the worship band. This coming Sunday, I'm preaching. So there's this activity. We have we meet in a gym, so we have to do all the tear down afterwards, and I help with that. And it's a lot. Sunday's very busy for me, and then Saturday has all sorts of other things. And if I'm not careful, it's very easy for me to get caught up in a cycle of never stopping. And so here, I just want to share some brief thoughts on how I see Sabbath being important for us, something to prioritize spiritually, socially, and also personally, and sharing a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes with me that's causing me to think more deeply and intently about not only the theme of this week's Sabbath, but what does it mean to be someone who worships, not just with my words, but how I live and respond to things. And so I invite your responses as well. So this is just me having a little extra sharing. First, spiritually, it's clear through the Bible that the Bible is not written in context of ease and privilege, and you have some of that, but there is a lot of realities going on and a lot of tensions going on and a lot of forces, both physical and spiritual, that tear people apart. And it's very easy to get caught up in that. In my book, Hope for the Oppressor, which was published last August, I talked about how we're really these separate people called in society. Not that we're somehow, there's more than one of us, but that our really being is divided into different parts of our life. And so we have a legal person, we have a social person, we have a religious person, we have a work person, and all these different things have different tensions, and sometimes even call us to be a different kind of person in a different kind of way, each of them calling for our allegiance, each of them promising some kind of satisfaction. But they pull us apart. They don't unite us because they have different goals. Like these are called it's systems, and there's different rules, and different systems aren't caring about us. They're caring about their own continuing. And so we're put in these contrasts, but we're given this sense of at least some kind of social or what a spiritual or legal or wholeness, but it's all just artificial. So a little bit starts chipping away, and we lose that. And so we respond in trying to make this integrated, but it's impossible. And we're so caught up and so busy that we often don't even see how we're being pulled in different directions, and how those many different directions aren't making us feel more whole or more part, but are actually tearing us away. And when I talked in my book about Hope for the Oppressors, that my argument was that oppressors are doing the act of oppressing not because they're wanting to do evil to everyone. Some are, but most people in very privileged societies or very privileged contexts, and that's always relative, of course, is most people are trying to make their way, and if they have to step on people or have other people pay for their peace, they do that. That's the way of Rome, right? The Roman peace was intended to help the citizens of Rome experience peace on the backs of others. But who are we called to be? The Bible calls us to stop, not because it's saying that stuff isn't important, or that uh, the only side that matters of us is this religious or spiritual side. It's to say stop and listen again. Be reminded who is Lord of all things. Be reminded of who is the only one who can bring integration of our life. And if we're not willing to stop for one day and get that renewal and let all the other systems and let all those other demands on us go, then we continue in this cycle of disintegration. And then we become the kind of people who push that on others. I'm flexible in this class on a lot of things precisely because I know a lot of you are bringing a lot of different rhythms into the class, and I want each of you to find your own rhythm for this class so that you can, at least some point in the week, stop and listen. And remember that as important as our studies are and as important as our work is all of this isn't as important as who you and I are before Christ. So Sabbath invites us to stop and listen and renew and rest. And we need that. And I need that every week. So Sabbath calls us to spiritual rest, not because we're lazy, but because we're active, because we're pressed in so many directions. Those things can easily become Lord of our life. But what is Lord of our life? Another element of Sabbath that I was reminded of today is we need Sabbath for our social participation. What do I mean by that? Today, in honoring Martin Luther King Jr., we're highlighting the impact he and others who joined with him made in changing, in transforming even the kinds of ways society was institutionally racist. Now, there's a lot of racism still around, but these things were embedded not only in the culture, but in the law themselves. And he said that's wrong. He didn't just say it's wrong to society. He said it's wrong to the kind of churches that were looking the other way or actively promoting it. I am a pastor in a denomination called the Wesleyan Church, and this was formed in the 1840s as a protest movement against the Methodist Church of the time, because the Methodist churches in places of wealth and power and control were accepting and in some cases even endorsing slavery. And Orange Scott and Luther Lee and others said, no, we can't do this. We can't, as Wesleyans, John Wesley was very much against slavery, continue this. And they were first kicked out of the denomination, and they started something new as a way of saying there has to be a better way. So I honor the idea of protest. Those who said, oh, we just need to keep quiet and calm, often aren't the ones who feel the weight of evil. And so I don't always agree with everything I see on television that's protesting, but I honor the idea that we can and should make our voices known and be active in resisting social evils, not just spiritual evils, but social evils. The challenge for that, however, is like with the systems of the world, the injustices in the world can take over our very soul. We get angry, we get frustrated, we get discouraged, and there's no end of people who say, this is the way to do it. You need to do it this way. You need to join our cause. And we can say, well, we don't like some of the things you're doing here. And they say, well, if you believe in the cause, sometimes it's right to join with them, but not always. We know that Jesus in his time was very much on the side of social change and healing, physical healing, and calling those who were corrupt to no longer be corrupt and return the money. And we can go down the list of all the ways Jesus responded to the different social realities and politics, but what he wasn't was a zealot. He didn't argue for the kind of military way and violence that was being instituted in the zealot movement at the time, even though he had a lot of the same passions and goals. But he said there's a way of doing this. It's not passive. It's not just, well, let's just wait to see change. No, Jesus wasn't passive. He went to the cross. He engaged people. He called people. The early church was not passive. They were known for being people who were radical about helping others and in treating others with dignity and respect and inclusion. You could go down that list as well. So what Sabbath does even though there is so much to do in this world, so much activity, so many things we could spend all our extra time doing, and not even our extra time, all our time doing, we can get so easily caught in the idea that our efforts are what's going to bring change. But what we need is the Spirit's help in this. The Spirit doesn't call us to be passive. But God doesn't also give us a purpose and then just say, well, however you want to do it. We believe in a God of salvation and a God of transformation. I wrote books on this, the transformative church. We're called to be engaged, to participate in, with, and for this world. But how do we do that? Not by following the ways of the world, but by following the Spirit, who sometimes calls us to act and sometimes calls us to wait. Sabbath reminds us who is Lord, who brings real transformation, who brings real healing. It causes us to pause, to listen, to pray. Not because we're ignoring the world, because for a brief time during the week, we're saying, we love this world so much, we're going to pursue it in light of God's mission. We're going to be not only purposeful, but we're going to be discerning. We're not just going to be active, but we're going to be efficient. What is the best way to bring transformation in someone's life or who's making a wrong decision? Sometimes you need to be strong and yell, and sometimes you need to give them a hug. How do we know which to do in any given setting? We need to be discerning in people who listen. And the Sabbath gives us a way to remember that and time to focus on that so that we can be people of transformation. Finally, personally, I found out this last week that my position as a professor here at Fuller will not be renewed after June. I have been on multiple contracts, 3-year contracts and 1-year contract, as the Fuller's financial state has been up in the air. And when the sale of the campus fell through, that caused some very strong, immediate, short-term challenges. And there is much I love about Fuller. I love the students. I love even much of the culture. I love my fellow faculty. I think there is a vision of Fuller that is unique in the theological world. We are conservative theologically, but we embrace a kind of diversity and role of women that some of the more typically conservative seminaries don't. And I love how we're participating in and for the transformation of people all over the world through helping teach and train women and men all over the world. But finances are finances, and I'm low on the totem pole. When you have a contract that ends, what do you do? And so I was told, even though I have very strong ratings on every metric and I'm publishing and all the rest, all those things, you say, well, what can I do to be successful in the field I am in? I'm doing all those things, and yet the reality is I'm losing this position. Philosopher Martha Nussbaum, who I've been reading a lot recently, says that emotional health is built on the idea that your efforts are able to bring transformation in the situations and context you're in. And when we feel like we're able to participate and what we do makes a difference or has an impact, then we feel in tune with the world. And the reality of my last week and periodically over the course of the last few years is no matter what I do, I'm told it's not enough. And that causes a lot of issues, personal issues internally, but also how am I going to pay for things going into after summer? I have a family, a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, a wife who's a worship leader, but at a small church and not paid. And there's just these realities of how my own sense of career and purpose. Have I made the right decisions? And frustration and anger at decisions that were made by others 10 years ago or more that put this in play so that those of us who are lower have to bear the weight for the decisions that others are being made. And that's disheartening, to say the least. It undermines my morale and it frustrates me, and go down the list. And yet this last week after I heard, I've been very intent not about saying, well, what does this mean for me? Or what is this? How can I say the things that I want to say to the people who've made these decisions? How can I, have a voice? But it's this turn. God is good. Sometimes I need to stop to remember that God is good and God loves me, and that whatever happens, God has always opened the door and made a way, even though he hasn't always made things clear ahead of time. So I go into the season of uncertainty, seeking worship, not giving into the anger, not giving into the anxiety, not giving into all the rest of those very human emotions when we're facing an experience of injustice, even and especially when that injustice isn't personal, but it's situational. And I come today, this week, thinking about Sabbath, knowing that a very human response to being told you're losing your job is to give in to panic, give in to frenzy. Who do I need to talk to? What do I need to write? How do I spend 16 hours a day trying to make this all good and right, and then alienate my family, alienate myself for what? And that's the challenge I face in this, is that I'm seeking to walk in this personal challenge, in the light of the social challenges, in the light of the spiritual challenges, as someone who is in tune with the very things we're talking about this in class. I'm seeking to have integrity, not when it's easy. I had a friend who does these spiritual retreats, and we were talking a while back, and she was noticing how a lot of the people who write books on spirituality, or will talk about in these very glowing terms about how they wake up in the morning and they go out into their large deck where the birds are singing, and they have all this time and space and prayer and all this, and then they write books about how to live these spiritual lives. And she was saying, and I agree, that has nothing to do with my life. It's very easy to be spiritual when your whole context is making that possible. When you live a life where everything is handed to you, and people are giving you a lot of space and privileges, and when your kids aren't yelling in the background, when you're trying to make just a video, well, it's tricky. How do you pray when your kids are yelling in the background? How do you find peace and calm in sharing a little devotional thought? Well, it's hard, and life is hard. It's easy to talk about spirituality and faith when you know how you're going to pay your bills and drive your car and where you'll live. It's hard and yet more real when you don't know those things, because at that point it becomes faith. It becomes risk, and faith is always risk. Sabbath is risk. Am I willing to stop for a day and let it go? Do I trust God? That's not a hypothetical question for me. That's not a question that I am sending out to you to, you all go do something with that. That's a question for me this week. That's a question for me in coming weeks. How do I live my life? Not so that I can plot and plan and strategize and maximize my own potential, but how can I live my life in a way that reflects the worship of God, Lord of all, creator of all things, who loves me, who sent his son to die for me, who was raised from the dead and sent the Spirit so that I can learn that I am loved and learn anew who to be in God's sheltering care. Do I believe that? Do I believe that when things are going well, and do I believe that when things are, to say the least, uncertain? I do. And I invite you into this as well. This isn't a game. And I know none of you are treating it like this. Some of you are in very serious circumstances as well. This is real life. And these are words. This call to Sabbath isn't just take a day off and, because we can, or if we can. It's take a day off because this is serious. And if we don't take days off in Sabbath, if we don't stop and reorient our vision and reorient our ears and reorient our sense of touch and smell and our whole self in light of God's calling for us, we will fall into the abyss, whether that's the frenzy or chaos or anger or all those other negative passions. And God calls us to love, peace, joy. This is the message of Paul. We were reading through Philippians and in my church service and 1 Corinthians in my Bible study. And it's just amazing how this guy could talk about being content and yet being beaten. And there was this certain time in which you thought, well, he's just, being dramatic. And the more I travel this road of walking with Christ, the more I see how much that is such a beautiful place to be. Because we are so caught up in a vision of who God is and what God is doing that however things work themselves out aren't defining for us. What defines us? When we take a Sabbath, we are saying God defines us. And we get a rest and have peace at the same time. So join me this week as we think about Sabbath. Take a day off this week. Take it after. I know life isn't according to our schedule, but take some time. I'm praying for you. I thank you so much for your encouragement, reading your writings over the last couple of weeks, especially last week when news is not exactly favorable. Reading your musings and thoughts and engagement is life-giving to me, and I'm not saying that artificially. It reminds me that God is doing a good thing. And then our conversations here are empowering and encouraging for each other. So let's keep it up. Have a great week.